much. So, I begin with the discussions, and my first question is absolutely based on our theme today. What does growing together look like in real life? And I'd like Dr. Devolina to start sharing the thoughts on this question. Then we come to you, Dr. Damini, and then eventually to you both.
Thank you, Priyanka, and thank you, Billabong, for having me. I love coming to Billabong and getting an opportunity to share my thoughts, so thank you for that. I think that question can be answered in a multiple number of ways. I'm not just a woman, but I'm also a teacher. So for me, I think a decade of teaching has taught me that growing together means learning the interconnectedness of people in society. When we talk about women, we have to talk about men. When we talk about women who are working, we have to recognize the labor of women who work in the laboring class. Because all of these are interrelated. The fact that women of middle class households go out to work, we can do that because there's someone else from the laboring class who has left her own child at home and come to substitute you. So I think growing together means, as a humanities professor, recognizing that communities are built by so many unrecognized forms of labor, emotional labor, domestic labor, and it is about recognizing the interrelatedness of this community. That something, an injustice that has nothing to do with me might affect me in the future, and how will that affect me? How the marginalization of someone far away also affects the way that I'm perceived. I think that for me is about, living in that web of harmony and extending that even to, I think, the natural environment. For the longest time, I think a lot of women's movements have depended on the connection with nature. And in a world where we are losing touch with nature, because of a certain idea of quote-unquote progress, I think it is about recognizing the interrelated web of our own survival. So for me, I think that would be very significant.
Thank you, Dr. Devolina. I cannot overemphasize upon being interconnected and the connections which actually define us, make us. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Dr. Damini, I'd like you to talk about what was it for you going together, if you can recall a few experiences.
Thank you so much. Dr. Devolina has given us a very wide perspective, and I would like to narrow it down so that the children can probably connect with it. Growing together for me, it means that growing together in an environment where there is equality, there is no discrimination, and there is absolute freedom from any kind of stereotypical expectations. That there are certain streams that the boys must study science and physics and math, girls must go for humanities. Because they kind of restrict our emotional growth, they restrict our career prospects, and they do a lot of damage. Again, I will wanted my personal experience, and I will give you the example of my own grandmother. She was brilliant at math, and she always wanted to be an engineer. But in those days, women engineers, I'm talking about 80 years back, that was something that was probably socially not acceptable. And people told her father that don't allow your daughter to study math, she will become an engineer, who will marry her. Imagine she will be working among the laborers and all, because probably civil engineering was more popular then. And she was asked to study either biology or go for humanities. So she was very unhappy. And I remember as a child, she would take a lot of interest in teaching me math. That was one subject I never liked. But she was, somehow maybe that was a passion that she could not complete again because of that stereotypical expectations. And things like boys don't cry, vulnerability is something that you don't expect from boys, or girls can't be assertive, they can't perform. So growing together is giving everybody freedom of choice, giving everybody equal opportunities, and not kind of tying them to any kind of gender-based biases or stereotypes. That for me is growing together. And fortunately, at home and even in school, we are striving for that. We have girls who play football, we have boys who are doing very well in art, we have boys in the humanities stream, boys writing poems, while girls are into debate and football. So for me, that is growing together.
Thank you so much. So, over to Anish and Zara. All of us are learning each day, but you are very much in the growing up phase still. So, what does it mean for you?
To me, growing together means creating these environments and spaces where we can just be who we truly are without any judgment or feeling like we're going to get criticized constantly. Because something that I've seen personally is there are these people who are just so willing to learn and to expand their horizons, but sometimes they just get constantly criticized by people who are more knowledgeable than them on a topic. And oftentimes that just forces them further back into their cages. And I think that's just perpetuating a cycle of ignorance, and only if you know about this thing can you learn about it.
According to me, growing together means developing and growing as a society around people that make us feel valued. It should be fueled not by competition but by inclusivity. It should be guided by mutual respect, by empathy, by compassion, and not by competitiveness. Because in a competitive society, it is really difficult for everyone to grow, whether it is individual growth or as a group. So,
Thank you, Zara. And with that question answered, I see four very strong individuals having very clear thought about what it should be growing together. I'd like to bring us back to the question, but also like to know from you, based on your personal experiences, what enabled you, empowered you to have the thoughts which you have about growing together? What was it like for you growing together?
Should I go first?
Yes, no other, please.
Okay, so I think that's such a deep question because one doesn't know where to start from. I actually grew up in a small town joint family, and as I was telling Priyanka the other day, that I grew up in a family where there were no women before me who were working. So, and women before me who went to an English medium school. So, I saw my grandmother live the life of a very stereotypical Bengali widow. She had her own separate room, her own diet, very, very cloistered. And I think growing up in that environment, because all of us are talking about sort of having enabling environments, very paradoxically, that environment allowed me to have a very happy childhood, but at the same time, I grew up thinking that I did not want to be like them. I did not want to be like the women of that household. As much as the women of that household played a really, really important part in shaping who I am. I think, cut to now, I think I am able to criticize a lot of the independent woman model that I sort of grew up emulating in early 2000 and 2010s. I think that model of the independent woman, hyper-independent woman, also needs to be undercut. I think it needs to be modified, it needs to be questioned, because I am what I am because of that community of women, the affection, the emotional labor they put in me. So I think going forward, experientially, I think it's very important, even as teachers, in the model of pedagogy where I am, to not just look at intellectual labor, but to look at affective labors, affection, to look at emotional labor. how do they play a part in, shaping people? So I think I look back at that relationship with my aunts and my grandmother, with my present growth, and not just through the growth of individuality. I feel like hyper independent individuality needs to be questioned, and we need to look at communities that enable our growths, people who we are afraid of being, right? And I think this critical relationship, one of love as well as of being able to question many of those social conditions that make them who they are, it's an ongoing process. I don't have a very clear-cut answer, short answer, say yes, no, or black or white. And this ongoing relationship continues to shape my journey as a person who came from that environment. So I don't really have a clear-cut answer to
And
that.
we are not looking for clear, defined answers. And this is not the objective for this panel. Whoever would like to go next.
My childhood experiences were very different from Dr. Debolina's. I grew up in a home which was very progressive. I was raised by my grandmother. My father was in the army, so it was a constant transfers for them. But at that point in time, we had some good public schools in Lucknow, and there was no differentiation. I was sent to Loreto, my brothers went to St. Francis, my cousins went to Lamar. So there was no differentiation as far as genders are concerned. Everybody was given what best education my parents could afford at that point of time. And though my grandmother was widowed at a very young age, she was very progressive, very modern, very independent, and took her own decisions and lived a life of dignity. And we were provided that kind of empathetic and open environment where we had these very open conversations. The elders, they pitched in, they listened to us with a lot of empathy and patience. We were never interrupted or asked to shut up. Whatever childish stories we had to share, whatever our concerns were, they were all entertained. And that is how I guess we got our confidence from. Being accepted, being heard, being valued, again, irrespective of gender. And when I went to school, probably the children, we all came from similar backgrounds. So most of them came from homes where growing together was something that was a given, it was taken for granted. But when I went to the university, for the first time I realized that growing together, this open kind of environment, this kind of empathetic environment, was probably a privilege that I had taken for granted. There I came across these girls who, again, there were some stereotypical expectations from them. And I realized that there is a lot that we have to do. Things are not that honky-dory as they appear to me, because I have not been exposed to this part of life, that everybody doesn't grow up in this kind of a comfortable and progressive environment. There are the girls who have to battle for a lot of things which came to us very, very easily.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Anish and Zara, would you like to add?
Yes, so for me, growing together meant I grew up with a lot of feminine influences in my life. You know, most of my friends growing up were girls, even now. I grew up with an older sister who's influenced me quite a bit. You know, and my mother, of course. So for me, that taught me to look at how gender shapes what we do, how we do it, and how we look at the world. Because gender is so pervasive, it's in everything we do. You know, it's not just about certain topics, you know, it's not just about women's rights, it's not just about human rights. It can be about medicine, it can be about disability, it can be about quite literally anything, because gender shapes who we are so much in our lives. And I think that growing up that way definitely helped me look at and recognize how and why gender is as it is in our lives.
Growing up together for me has been a pretty pleasant experience with my family. Because my family, especially my parents, have always been really inclusive and they've never really discriminated. I grew up watching everyone around me work, irrespective of their gender, and become really successful. And my grandmother has always been a beacon for me because she's not like the stereotypical grandmother one would imagine. She's always been really bold and strong opinionated. And the best part is she's never been afraid to put her opinion forward. So,
Thank you, Zara. I'm glad you've had those experiences. I heard a few words when you were sharing your responses from having stereotypes to moving on to the other extreme of this modern women, which is now being overhyped. So I'd like us to think about that. And my next question would be, we've come a long way, of course, with the stories you have shared. But what are the stereotypes that you feel still exist on this extreme or the other, which we need to work towards, which we need to overcome? And I'd like to start with Dr. Damini in this instance, and then Dr. Delina or Anshin Zara, whoever wanted to go next.
Thank you. My personal observation is that over the years, a lot of stereotypes have been broken. Initially, it was basically men were the bread earners, women were the caregivers. Their place was in the home. They were supposed to be weak, emotional, and of course, best at home, taking care of the children and the household, providing a safe and comfortable hearth, while the men went out to work. Things definitely have changed. Women have got opportunities. Today, they are doctors, engineers, teachers, and many of them even join the defense forces. That is progress that we have made over the past 75 or 80 years. But still, some stereotypes remain. Even though women have got opportunities to go out and work and prove their mettle, there are still some expectations from them. When they come home, they are the ones who make the tea, they are the ones who cook the dinner. The man just comes home, throws aside his bag, he's done for the day, he needs rest. So I think those cultural and social stereotypes, those expectations which are still attached, those shackles need to be broken. Men and women, they are equal partners, both have to take responsibility. And since women have also become bread earners, it is not only men who keep the kitchen fires burning, they must also contribute in taking care of all the household chores. And when fathers do it, I think that is when the sons will also learn that these are not gender-specific roles, these are lifestyle skills which all of us have to learn. Because one day, most of us, the children these days, once they are done with their grade, they go out. And then all of them, they need to keep their rooms clean. They have to do some kind of emergency cooking also. So cooking and caregiving and cleaning the home is no longer, I would say, a responsibility of women. It's a skill, it's a life skill which all of us have to learn. And girls must also learn to be independent, to go out. And for example, normally I remember during childhood, I had seen in the neighborhood, the boy would be sent out to get the grocery and do this kind of work, while the girl was expected to clean the room and help the mother with household chores. So here I think this distinction now should be merged. Everybody should be doing everything.
So roles and responsibilities to rise above genders and be based on preferences.
Yes. It's all about individuals, no longer about genders.
Yes, thank you. Would you like to go?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, to me, I think that when we're talking about stereotypes, I think it's also really important to acknowledge the role that women play in also perpetuating these stereotypes. Because I think that when you're the oppressed in a situation, your entire life is built around the system that oppresses you. So even if it may be a better outcome for you or for everybody in general, you try to break out of that system. Sometimes I think that people need the comfort of having that system, especially because if you're the oppressor, you're not that tied to the system, not very much really. Like if the patriarchy was to just poof, vanish today, men wouldn't really be affected because a lot of us can just be who we are unashamedly. But for women, it's more like when you've spent your whole life listening to everybody around you talking about these things and how you're supposed to be this. But no, wait 1 year, now you're actually supposed to be that. You were supposed to be a housewife yesterday, but now you're supposed to be a hyper-independent CEO. You know, when you have to shape your whole life around these narratives, it can sometimes be a place to find solace in. This system that necessary. Zara, would you like to go next?
According to me, a few stereotypes that still remain are first of all that guys are expected to be tougher, more unemotional, which leads to them not being able to show vulnerability or express their emotions in ideas. While girls are expected to be calmer, they're expected to be more controlled and quieter. I have a real life example for that. In my French class, something that I've noticed is that the guys rarely speak. Even though our teacher constantly urges them to ask their doubts and put their point forward, they rarely speak. And in my opinion, what I think is, in their heads, the average male that is accepted in society and is seen as traditionally masculine does not necessarily have to be academically smart. He just has to be good at sports. He just has to have surface level knowledge about politics and have leadership qualities. Even if it may lead to the case of blind leading the blind, he has to be the one who's leading. And they're not to blame for that. Society is to blame for that. Because since our childhood, these stereotypes and traditional expectations are drilled into us, which lead to insecurity and fragile egos.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Zara and Anush. That was profound. So now I move on to Dr. Develina. The same question. What stereotypes do you think exist, need to be overcome? I like the way Anush had phrased it, how we need both. But also you talked about the over-emphasis on women being independent. I think we are also, there's the other risk that now expect the independent women to be of certain time doing certain things. So I like to be talking about both.
So I think it's interesting because I don't think this answer can be homogeneous. Because I've experienced gender in different ways in 3 different locations, in Siliguri differently, in Delhi differently, then differently as a working woman in Delhi itself, and very differently in Bhopal. So it's not like usually when I hear people talking about gender and the status of women in India today, they talk about a homogeneous, are women oppressed, are they not oppressed? I don't think we have the same homogeneity even in this room about our experiences of gender. It will depend on our class, our education, our location, our social location. I'm sure if we're having the same conversation to schools, in a government school, it'll be different. It'll be in a different language, right? So these stereotypes also exist in pockets and exist in the way that we are able to negotiate with these stereotypes. But I do kind of agree with Zara's conceptualization of gender through emotions. Like strength is supposed to belong to men and softness is supposed to belong to women. I think gender also works like molds. At a certain age from puberty onwards, we're supposed to get into these, like if you imagine wearing a mask, right? And that is the emotion that you're supposed to project. I feel like that's the most harm that these stereotypings of gender sort of does. That you cannot play out other emotions. And I don't agree that patriarchy doesn't harmfully affect men. I think patriarchy is equally burdensome for men in the way that they're supposed to play certain roles of being the provider, of being the strong one. If you look at the way that men and women both change during their middle ages, the midlife crisis, I think all of us start to question these roles that we are supposed to be straight-jacketed into. So I think questioning the stereotype is incumbent on both genders, because I don't think you can live with a role for the rest of your life, because the cost of sort of being stereotyped is being in that same role forever and not being able to experience other emotions, right? And just coming back to the burden of the hyper-independent woman, I think it's really like a double-edged sword, I think just this idea of existing as, but it also depends on the environment you're in. There are environments that will talk about the hyper-independent woman as if without a family, as if your parents are not your family, as if only having children is the only definition of a family. I think but it puts you in a very interesting place in society in terms of you being able to view things critically, in you being able to question the scripts of our life. That and this is like I'm saying, it's a double-edged sword. You are able to question this script of a life. You're supposed to get married by 28, have a kid by 30, I don't know, or have 2 kids by 35, have a house by 30. There's a script through which we are expected to lead our lives. And this is not just true for women, this is also true for men. And this idea of being hyper-independent means you have to do it all on your own, and you have to do it all the time, and you have to do it in a way where you're proving that you can do it. And I think it's a lot of pressure for all of us, for the hyper-independent woman to prove certain things to her own family, to prove certain things to the men. But there is also some unexpected outcomes of it. You end up having some of the most compassionate conversations with people from the opposite gender, who then are able to share, because men are also expected to be hyper-independent. They're supposed to do it all. They're supposed to do it perfectly. They're supposed to do it alone, and they're supposed to bear that burden. So, if you cut across the stereotypes, you are able to open communication that is driven by compassion. And I think after a point, the benefits of living a life outside of gender stereotypes is to be able to connect in these unfamiliar ways, unexpected ways.
Thank you so much. Want to add something? Yes.
And also adding on to Dr. Jay's point, how you said that a man has to be strong or a woman has to be soft, but even when these roles are subverted, they have to be in a way that still conform to gender roles. A woman can be strong, but she has to be strong like a woman. She can't be offensive. She can't go and tell her employee to not overstep her boundaries. She can't do that. She has to be strong, sure, but she has to do it openly, but not offensively. And when a man is soft, he has to do it in private. He has to have emotions. He has to cry. He has to do everything that comes with being a human being, but he has to do it like a man. He can't go and confront his friends and bully him about being emotional. You have to conform to these gender roles, and sometimes I think that gender roles as a whole are a type of prison, and I think that we should try to break out of. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Ansh. So what I hear from this panel is that growing together is an experience which is highly dependent on the environment, the culture we are in. It also brought about the point of interconnectedness or connections which we develop as we are growing together. So I take school, our families also as an environment where we are growing together every day. I also understand the point that while we have come a long way, there are still expectations which are like a man or like a woman. And we are working towards breaking those barriers each single day. So my last question to the panel and also to my audience is if you could share your thoughts about if there is one small change you were to bring in your behavior or you were to think of which we need to bring about, very small change in behavior, thoughts, expectations, actions, what will it be which we can start now? And the question is to the audience as well. Anyone can go first.
When the audience is thinking whatever question they want to throw at us, I was hearing the gentleman out and also Sarah. So taking forward from whatever concerns that they expressed, yes, as you said, still some stereotypes are there, but we can challenge them, we can overcome, provided we provide the right kind of environment both at school and at home. Again, I will share a personal experience. I will not name the children. They were with me in grade 12, they were both boys. And when they were passing out grade 12, both of them became very emotional. And they came to me and they were in tears, they were crying. I just kind of hugged them. I allowed them to cry. I did not make them feel that they are, this is not something they are showing any kind of weakness. So they cried, they were very, very emotional. At the thought that they would be leaving school and they would no longer be with us, I just tried to comfort them and tell them, don't worry. The bond between teacher and taught is established between us and it is one for life. Wherever you go, you will be my student as long as either of us is there on planet Earth. So I allowed them to cry, and in the same batch I had girls who were very good debaters. So, and there was one child who was an exceptional artist. So all of them got that safe space to express themselves, and when they were respected and accepted the way they were, they have all bloomed and all of them are at wonderful institutions and doing very well for themselves. So I think that acceptance should be there, and that otherwise, either men will become emotionally stunted or women will never grow up to be independent. So it is all of us, and gender equality is not about women competing with men trying to say that we are better. Growing together is inclusive growth. It is not in isolation, it is not in competition, but it is collaborative. It is like a symbiotic relationship and it's a mutual benefit to both. Now, I think the house is open. Questions and
Yes,
answers.
I would like to have one concluding thought from, I think Zara is ready, so is Dr. Devolina.
If I had to change something about myself and the people around me, it would be like I would want them to become better listeners. Because most of the time when someone is speaking, either they're not allowed to finish their thought and they're shut down, or people only listen to reply. Instead, what we should be doing, we should listen to them and then we should process what they said. Another thing we need to accept is that all the people around us, they come from different backgrounds. And in this case, we can even take gender into consideration because boys and girls may experience expectations differently in school and even in society. So we need to accept that the people around us, they can have opinions that differ from us. And we need to, even if respectful listening doesn't always have to be agreement. We need to learn how to disagree respectfully and without offending the person, do it politely.
Thank you, Zara.
Yeah, so I go back to the home where I grew up. I usually would I have very fond memories of eating with my aunts and my grandmother and my mother. Eating was something that women would do, but I would always see that they would eat the last servings after serving everybody. And I think the one thing that I did differently when I grew up and became an adult is change that equation. One small thing for me when I was an adult, and at that point feminism could have been many things, but for me it meant changing that equation, or at least trying to change that equation, where my mother was not the last one to eat, or she was not eating certain cuts of food which nobody else wanted to eat. So if people were eating fish, the men always got the head and women always got the tail, things like that. For me, that small thing is something I do even now. My mother lives with me, and I always say my mother lives with me, not I live with my mother. And But she eats her own thing, I eat my own thing. For me, it begins in the kitchen because I love to cook, I love to feed. But that equation, that gender equation in the kitchen has always bothered me, and I feel like that's one small thing that all of us, even if we can't change in our homes, can pay attention to. Who is eating what? Who's eating the leftovers? Forget the cooking, right? Who is eating again those same roles, right? And that is defined as no, मुझे तो यही पसंद है, but not necessarily. So just that small thing in my everyday life.
And I think it is about the small things which lead to big changes.
So, if you only had one takeaway from here in this panel, I think that it would just be please try to recognize the differences that gender, and not just gender, this applies to a lot of things. Just try to recognize these changes before trying to do something and work on yourself, because that's the first step. You need to first know what you're trying to change and why it happens before you can actually change it. And I think that one of the best ways to do this is just please be friends with people of the opposite gender. It's such an eye-opening experience, and when you really look at it, you realize, oh, gender really isn't something of much consequence when it comes to friendship. Some of the most enriching friendships I've seen and had are between two people of opposite genders, and it helps you both realize just how much gender affects us, and just how much we can reject that, and just how much it really both matters way too much and matters not at all. It's kind of a paradox.
Thank you, Ansh. Now over to the audience if you have a thought or any question for any of our panelists. One thing I think that everybody should change inside themselves, that they should stop judging and criticizing people. Everyone over here, I think, before talking to someone new, they think 10 times before speaking because they are scared that people will judge. So that one thing that people should not judge and criticize before listening to people. I think that is so true irrespective of any gender, any age, any group. Thank you so much. Any other thought? Or a question? Alright, I would certainly like to thank the panel. I think one thing which we all recognize and know that going together is not a straight line. It's a curve, it's a zigzag, and it can only happen more fruitfully when we are not trying to outpace each other. As we heard, and Anshla, you emphasized that it is not about comparisons, it is not about thinking who's better, but it is how we work together. And that is what every member in the panel emphasized upon, that it is how we work with each other as a community, supporting each other where we need, not thinking who's the weaker, who's the stronger. Thank you so much.